All right, let's bring in Eric Crocker, man. Lockdown 49ers podcast. On his Twitter page, he says he's a washed-up football player, but I don't know, man. The guy looks like he's in incredible shape. Crocky does a great job of covering the 49ers, breaking it down, the all-22s and everything. I always learn something whenever he comes on the show. I really do. That's why I appreciate him. That's why we always bring him back on the show. But, Croc, welcome back to the roast. Shasky, Bonte.
What's up, buddy?
The drill here at 95.7 The Game. A lot has been made about Steve Wilks, so let's just start there. Actually, let's start with the trade, and we'll get to Wilks, and we'll get to the scheme, whether or not he should be on the field or the booth and all that nonsense. Chase Young, your thoughts? Low risk, high reward move, obviously, but what are your thoughts on Chase Young, the player?
He's a guy that obviously coming out of college has extremely high upside, and it hasn't worked for various reasons. My time in the NFL, I got to see a lot of really talented guys, that went really high, top 5, top 10. I was in the locker room with guys like Quentin Coples. He was a first-round pick, Muhammad Wilkerson, D. Milliner, and obviously guys like Antonio Cromartie and Darrell Reeves. I got to see them too. And the one thing I'd say from guys, and Sheldon Richardson, who won Rookie of the Year that year. But the one thing I would say from the guys that are super talented like that don't work out, a lot of times it's something you can't really quantify throughout the draft process outside of you don't know how they're going to prepare once they get that money. And a guy like Chase Young, I don't know him at all, and I haven't heard anything about him, good or bad. But just kind of looking at a guy like that's that freakish, why doesn't it work? And a lot of times it comes to that work ethic, especially once you get that money. So if I had to guess, maybe he had to learn how to be a professional. And if you see this year, after they had already decided, hey, we are not going to keep his, we're not going to pick up his 5th-year option. We are going to let him go after the year. So let's try to get something for him. But he's kind of having his best year so far, at least from a sack standpoint. So I think it's a good pickup for the 49ers. It helps the front end. It helps the back end as well. Guys that need help in that secondary. So, low risk, high reward.
Who are the 49ers currently? Are they the team that won 5 in a row in blowout fashion? Are they closer to that, or are they closer to the team that looks discombobulated and injured right now on both sides of the ball?
I think everybody's trying to figure that out right now. This is a team that throughout the years has kind of been carried by the defense, right? The defense has always played very well. When the defense plays well, the team does good. I mean, you can go back to the Harbaugh years and see kind of how that whole thing worked out. And then you look at Shanahan and how the team is built. His first draft picks were Solomon Thomas and Reuben Foster. They told you what they wanted to do. They wanted to build this from the front of that defense, and then everything you get from the offense is an extra. And I think over these last couple games, you've seen where they maybe need the offense to be a little extra because the defense didn't have their fastball, right? The defense was off a little bit, and I know we'll kind of get to that. But I think ultimately it's a couple of bad games. I think they still are that team that should be viewed as a contender. But this 3-game skid has people really questioning that and really kind of grasping at straws to try to figure out why exactly is this team looking like this? And, oh, man, now they're not a contender. Now they need to fire Wilks. Now they need to figure out a new scheme, or Wilks need to come down to the field and all this other stuff, when really it's just they just need to win a game. And I think they win the game, they go to Jacksonville and win, I think everything will change.
It's Croc time here on the Morning Roast on 95.7 The Game. Eric Crocker, of course, Lockdown 49ers podcast, does a lot more breaking down the 49ers, knows the game inside and out. All right, let's get to Wilks because – Crocky, I don't know if you agree with this, but I feel like Steve Wilks has gotten an unfair amount of blame for what's going on with this defense. He can't tackle for them. He can't rush the passer for them. And we had Brian Baldinger on earlier this week, and he said, look, it doesn't make a difference whether he's in the booth or on the field. Look at Dan Quinn. He's in the booth, and the Cowboys defense is flying around. So what is your take on Steve Wilks getting the blame? Let's just start there before we get into scheme and who should shoulder all the blame here. What is your impression of Steve Wilks' defense so far this season?
I think he's being used as a scapegoat. Again, I think you're in a skid and people don't know how to handle it. We've seen this every year from the 49ers, a team that maybe starts off well or doesn't start off well, but they go through some kind of lull defensively for a couple games. Last year it was the Atlanta Falcons, and I don't know why people forget this, but the Falcons threw one incomplete pass in an entire game against the Niners ran all over the 49ers. The 49ers couldn't stop a nosebleed in that game. 49ers ended up losing 28-14. Then the very next week, remember, they traded for McCaffrey, but they got blown out at home by Kansas City. Kansas City put up 40-something points. And I know Kansas City, good offense, et cetera. But at the end of the day, 40-plus is 40-plus, right? So there was a 2-game skid there where they had to figure things out. And I think they're just kind of going through something like that right now. And I think Wilks has been kind of the scapegoat of all this because people can't figure out exactly what's going on. But in my opinion, and this is why I say he's a scapegoat, I think if you want to be a Super Bowl team, right, and the question I've been asking on Locked On 49ers, and I've asked some other people, what are the best 49ers teams we've seen over the last 40 years, right? Like defensively. You would probably say 2000, that Bowman and Willis years. You might say 2019. You might go back to 1994 and say that was a terrific defense as well, right? But the biggest difference that we saw in all those years combined is in 94, they actually had an offense that can put up a ton of points consistently as well. Like their offense complemented the defense and it was just as good, if not better. You got an MVP at quarterback. And right now, everybody thinks that they have to depend on the defense to just hold teams to 22 or less or 15 or less points. And if they don't, then, oh, man, you're going to lose. And the defense is just so bad. When really I feel like they've had a rough couple of games, but nothing that they shouldn't be able to overcome if they have a little bit better offense. And I think the kind of offense kind of let them down a little bit over 3 games, only scoring 17 points in each of those.
Yeah, I think we agree on that because Bonte and I have been kicking that around for almost 2 full weeks now. Like, this offense is supposed to be able to pick up this. It's been 15 years. Right. The defense has bailed out the offense. And like 2 games in the last 15 years, I can remember the offense bailing out the defense. And one of those was Kaepernick at home in Candlestick. So schematically, though, you understand playing cornerback, playing defense. A lot of, common fans don't. Like, schematically, what are they doing different? It feels like the DBs, just my naked eye, they're laying back a lot, and we're hearing a lot of like, the pass rush isn't synced up with the coverages. Most of us don't understand what that means. Are you seeing different stuff that Wilks is doing compared to years past? Are you seeing a drop-off in player production? Why does it look so different?
Well, first we have to remember that, when you look at Robert Saleh, he came in with Shanahan. Shanahan handpicked him. This is the defense I want to run. He groomed them to that, and then they transitioned into more of a 2-high defense over the years, right? Well, throughout that entire time, when they're going through those different transitions, who's also there? D'Amico Ryans, who eventually takes over as the defense coordinator. Well, now you get Wilks. He's an outsider, and I really feel like he's still kind of learning the guys, the players, how to utilize everyone. You think with so much talent, maybe it should be easy. And early on, we did see some success. Now I think he's just kind of going through a transition to try to figure out, like, all right, how can I figure out different ways to put these guys in the best situations? I feel like everything, almost like a rookie quarterback, is you're kind of going through it for the first time. Right? So, hey, man, I called this terrible 3rd down call before the half against Minnesota. I won't do that again, and I won't put Travis Ward in that position, even though the ball hit him in the chest. But I won't put Travis Ward in that kind of position again, right? So you kind of continue to figure out what works, what doesn't, and I'd assume that you see a better version of them down the second half. Now, I heard what Sherm said. Too much man coverage, not enough zone. I've heard, some of the things that Shanahan has said as well. Well, nobody was complaining about the man coverage when they demolished the Dallas Cowboys. They probably ran more man than I've ever seen. A single high, just in your face, and they demolished the Cowboys, had multiple interceptions, took the ball away, held them to 10 points. Nobody complained about the man then, but now because you get picked apart by Joe Burrow and Cousins, who I think are both really good quarterbacks, now all of a sudden, got to scrap everything that we've been doing throughout the year. So the second half against the Rams, what they run, they were really soft first half, a lot of zone, a lot of off. Second half, a lot of man. What they get, multiple interceptions, and ended up winning that game, held the Rams to like 6 points in the second half. Yep. So I think right now it's just they got to get back to just figuring out, like, all right, let's block out the outside noise. What do we do well? Let's game plan. Stick to what we're doing. Wilks continue to learn the guys and get it rolling down the second half of the season.
Croc, this is why I love having you on, because you actually tipped us off. We had you on before the Cleveland game. We had you on before that as well. You mentioned how this is Shanahan's defense. He's really the defensive coordinator, which is what I've been harping on all week long. We've been mentioning that, saying, wait a minute here. Wilks is running Shanahan's defense. They didn't blitz in that first half against Cincinnati, as you just mentioned here. They blitzed, one time, and they actually generated a sack on that blitz. So I do think Wilks has been scapegoated. Nobody was complaining during the 5-game winning streak about Steve Wilks and whether or not he's in the booth or the sideline. Do you believe in that? Do you believe that's going to make a difference for this defense?
Nah, you know what will make a difference, man? The 49ers finishing up and getting these sacks. Last year, and people they gloss over this because of how great Nick Bosa was. But he really carried the defense, and he really carried the defensive line. That defense last year, I think they had 44 sacks. Well, 18 and a half, 19 of them were from Nick Bosa. There wasn't a whole lot of production outside of Bosa, but he was so great, right? But you look at a team like the Philadelphia Eagles, who were number 1 in sacks, well, they had 70. That's a big difference, 70 sacks compared to 44, right? And
right.
44, half of those coming from one player. So Nick Bosa this year hasn't been great, which he was last year. And he's kind of getting there, right? The pressures are there. His rush percentage, win rate, all that stuff is high, but he's not finishing. And I think ultimately last year kind of masked a little bit more of an average pass rush defense. This year he hasn't been able to mask that, and I think we're feeling the effects of that. If he gets home a few more times, right, like I think he's at 2.5, 3 sacks right now. Let's say he had 6. Those 6 sacks are probably some real game-changing plays, getting guys off the field, getting stops, and forcing punts. If you force 3 more punts over the span of the Vikings and the Bengals,
right?
How they probably win, right?
Yeah.
They probably win. So that right there, I think, is kind of the difference in the sense of just that consistency we're used to seeing from the defense.
Right. Crocky, it really ticked me off when Shanahan, I thought he threw Steve Wilks under the bus. It really ticked me off. Bosa throwing Steve Wilks under the bus. And I thought Fred Warner showed a lot of class at the last game by saying, no, it's on the players. We're taking accountability for missing over 30 tackles in the last 3 weeks. What did you make of Shanahan kind of calling out that zero blitz? We know it was a bad play call, but in my opinion, your offense didn't score more than 17 points for 3 straight weeks. Your offense threw 2 picks in the fourth quarter. Your offense has turned the ball over 5 times in the last five quarters. What did you make of Shanahan kind of throwing Steve Wilks out there, hanging him out to dry, when we all knew it was a bad play call, but he went out there on the podium anyway and still undressed him?
Yeah, you would like that to be a conversation that is, kind of kept indoors. And when you ask about it, right, I really like the way everybody's different. Every coach is different. Every coach I've been around, I was with the Jets for a little bit. Even that little bit of time I was with the Jets, the way that Rex Ryan was and, in the media, and then compared to how he was around his players, it was kind of different. He was going to put everything on his shoulders. And I think for Kyle, he's been one to I don't want to say take accountability, but we kind of seen that when he gets asked certain things, he kind of gives a-hole answers. Or when he was asked about the injuries, he talked about that with the quarterbacks, well, I didn't do anything. It's just normal plays. It just happens, right? And maybe it just does, but it seems like there's certain things with him that just continue to happen, but then you don't quite see that ownership that he's taking, accountability for those things that are happening. So it was tough to kind of hear that from my standpoint because I wouldn't throw one of my guys under the bus. I mean, I coach high school football, but I'm not going to go to the newspaper and say, well, Lavelle Hawkins, he just, he didn't call a good game offensively. Or Desmond Bishop, hey, I'm just a DB coach, Desmond Bishop. I don't like the way he called the defense tonight. I wouldn't do that. So it's interesting to hear Kyle do that, but maybe he's just a little too honest.
At 20 seconds, we're up against it. What has happened to Charvarius Ward? Why is he holding everyone?
He's always been a grabby guy. He's been a guy that was grabby, shoots coming out of college. Guys that are like him that are undrafted, and I was one of those guys, right? And kudos to him. I mean, I lasted in the NFL, 6 months or something like that. He's a guy that lasted, all these years and earned big-time contracts. So a lot of times guys like us, we got some deficiencies a lot of times with the athleticism, lack thereof, or maybe size. For him, I think, you watch his turn and run, he kind of struggles with that a little bit. Then he's definitely a little grabby. And right now, everything is catered to the offense. Everything is catered towards offense, winning, scoring, keeping drives going, getting points. And when you're holding or you give the refs any reason, they will definitely throw that flag. He's one of those grabby guys. He likes to play more with physicality at the top of routes as opposed to playing with his feet to put him in position to make plays. So I think that's what we're seeing. We see that from Rashard Robinson some years ago when he was on the Niners, right? He grabbed a lot. I think Charvarius Ward, he's another one of those grabby guys. Hey, Legion of Boom years, he might get away with it. 2023, they're all over that.
Nah, no doubt about that. Crocky, man, keep up the great work, man. We love your insight. We always appreciate the time you spend with us here on the Morning Roast. Keep up the good work, man.
All right, appreciate y'all.
Anytime. Eric Crocker here on the Morning Roast on 95.7 The Game.